ikinä näksin mange av Taranaki koonati tauivi te iwi no Italy aho. Kiitti fanganu ja täällä kainga ko Giacomo Calevni to koingoa. Adamai, thanks for coming, guys. Great to see some returning customers from last year and lots of new faces. So great. I'm Giacomo Calevni. I'm the director for Taranaki Offshore Partnership, looking at feasibility of offshore wind farms off the coast. You probably heard about some news about this. So a year ago, we started a series of presentations similar to this, so four events spread over 4 months. The first one was very much an introduction to what offshore wind is and what this project could look like. So this year, I picked some of that stuff and kept it in the slides because maybe some people are new to the conversation. And then I tried to focus a bit on what other sort of new things will happen in this last year. We have other sessions, I'll talk about them later today. But so today it's more focused on, again, what is offshore wind, what's happened in the last year, what are we looking to do in the coming months. Very much other than that, open to questions, anything you want to ask, please jump in. There's no wrong questions. And yeah, so jump into it, what happened. So a bit of a recap from last year. We'll have to manage this. So first of all, who is Taranaki Offshore Partnership? 2 companies, New Zealand Super Fund, probably heard about them, Sovereign Wealth Fund of New Zealand, so sort of the company tasked by government to invest money efficiently and sustainably in order to grow a sort of bit of a pension pot fund for when in a few years' time people are living much longer and we're not paying as many taxes and there's a lot of money for pensions to go around. So that's what they're doing, investing hopefully decently. And the other company that I represent is Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, so a large Danish investment fund, focused mostly on offshore wind. That's the thing that we've been doing mostly for the last 10, 15 years, very successfully around the world. We have a number of offshore wind farms in operation, for example, in Germany, in Scotland, in Taiwan. We just finished building 2 in Taiwan, and we're building a 3rd, one in the US, and we're looking at the first offshore wind farm in Australia as well. So before I go any further, worth reiterating something I said last year. We're talking about a huge, big project. We are years away from any real decisions made on this thing. So one thing that I want to make clear is that we are here in the very, very early stages of having these conversations with community so that we can hear what the questions might be or the perplexities might be. We understand that these can be, it can be a bit triggering for some people to hear the words offshore, big project, the marine environment and so on. So we're here, again, very early to have a discussion, hear what the concerns are, and hopefully have a bit of a two-way communication that will last for a number of years while we build our own assessment of whether this is a good project in South Taranaki. Very quickly, what is offshore wind? We take wind turbines and plonk them in the sea. This is a picture of one of our German offshore wind farms. That's sort of a typical layout. You would have wind turbines spaced out roughly 1.5–2 kilometers from each other, so quite far apart. They would be connected in sort of a string, we call it a string, by underwater cables. That string will then converge, you can't really see it, but there's a platform there called an offshore substation. That looks a little bit like an oil and gas platform. It's basically where all the electricity gets collected from all the turbines, and from there you would have 1 or 2 large subsea cables that run all the way to shore and deliver the electricity to a bigger crane and so on. So that's sort of a typical makeup of a offshore wind farm. This is 400 megawatts. Just as a comparison, the Stratford gas power plant is 377 as far as I know. So this power plant is sort of the power of a Stratford gas.
Just while you're talking about the underwater cables there,
Sure.
I'm from the Party Boating Club, and you're just looking at laying them on the shore, on the bottom of the sea, eh? You're not actually putting them under, because how would that affect like our fishing ability and anchoring and such like?
Yeah, it's a good question. That's one of the things that we don't have an answer for right now. Both options are open. Normally, one of the things that gets sort of considered is the environmental impact of trenching them rather than leaving them on the seabed. It depends also how active that seabed is. For example, we understand that there's quite some big sand waves that go around, South Taranaki Bay, but potentially 1.5–2 meters high. And normally the trenching depth is 1.5–2 meters. So we have to ask ourselves, well, is it worth trenching them? And then the sand wave goes past and they're exposed. So that's all the kind of stuff, that technical considerations that we'll have to make, and the fishing, constraints obviously will be one as well. The impact with fishing normally is just bottom trawling that obviously impacts the underwater cables. Otherwise, standard sort of recreational fishing or line fishing is fine. So yeah, yeah, cool. So keep them coming. Why build offshore wind turbines and not just on land? Offshore you get much better wind conditions because the wind sort of blows stronger and obviously unimpeded. There's no hills or anything like that out there. So in general you sort of get a better product. Let's say the wind is much stronger. We get what we call better capacity factors, as in on average an offshore wind turbine generates more electricity than an onshore wind turbine. The reason that it's more efficient is also that we can build bigger machines. So these are much larger turbines than the ones that you see onshore, for example, YPP. And we can do that because we have vessels that are pretty huge. I'll show some pictures. This is one. So in general, the sort of logistics work a little bit better. Another pro is obviously, as far as they are far enough from the coast, you won't really see them that much. They will be quite small on the horizon. For example, for this project, we're looking at outside the 12 nautical miles, which is 23 kilometers offshore. So they will be visible on the horizon on a clear day, but quite small on the horizon. That's one of the things that we'll have to obviously consider in the coming years, but very different from having them on land where they are very visible. Why South Taranaki specifically? So on the left-hand side there you have a map of wind speeds around New Zealand. You see that Taranaki glows, purple, which is the highest wind speed there. And then on this map I kind of put two lines. The yellow one is the 12 nautical miles, so those 23 kilometers from shore that I was talking about, so that we're out enough that they're not so visible. And this green one is a 60-meter water depth contour. 60 meters is sort of the maximum depth that we can look at to actually connect the turbines to the seabed. Deeper than that, this starts becoming technically pretty challenging. So the combination of those two parameters means that this area is sort of the offshore wind opportunity area for New Zealand, really. There's not that many more because, in general, the seabed tends to fall quite rapidly around the coast. So what does an offshore wind farm look like, as in the individual components? They have a wind turbine over there, pretty similar to the onshore ones. You have a tower, have what's called a nacelle, which is what holds the three blades together. Three blades spin, they spin a generator, and that generates electricity. That is connected to the seabed with a foundation, and I'll show you a couple of examples of different types of foundation. I talked earlier about the cables that connect the various turbines to each other and then off the shore. That's what the offshore substation would look like, where all the electricity gets collected. And then once the cables land at shore, there will be an onshore substation, which is, you see these all over the place. It's what basically connects that high voltage to a different type of voltage that then runs into the pylons that we all love. As I was saying, they're pretty big, as in bigger than the ones that you get onshore. The length of the blades that we will be considering for a project like this is 110 meters. So the whole diameter of the rotor is around 230 meters, considering the nacelle in the middle as well. Really big machines. They would produce 15 megawatts of power, at maximum rated power. Again, as a comparison, the YPP ones, I think they're 4 megawatts. If someone can do it better, let's say that's 4 megawatts. So more powerful than those. This is the same picture that we have here. It takes specific installation vessels to actually deliver these things and build them. They're so-called jack-up vessels. You see that they actually prop themselves out of the water in order to provide a stable platform for putting the blades connecting the blades to the nacelle. Not many of these vessels around the world. They're mostly back in Europe. There's Taiwan just built their first one a few years ago. But this is one of the things that, in order to build a project 10 years from now, we already have to start thinking around sort of booking one of these, because there's not many around. Pretty expensive as well. These are various types of connections to the seabed, various types of foundation. We can ignore for the moment those three on the left, which are floating. Floating offshore wind, just a word, is suitable for much deeper water, so New Zealand could have a lot of that. it's a technology that is still a little bit behind, still really, really expensive to get those to work. And so the reality is that most projects around the world at the moment are focusing, if possible, on the shallower sites where you can build connected to the seabed. And I would say of these three, jacket, suction bucket, and monopile is by far the most used technology. It's a big steel cylinder that gets cracked into the seabed, 20, 30 meters into the seabed, and then the turbine gets connected on top, so it basically becomes a long stick. You can see why we're sort of limited in water depth with that. The minute that you have 30 meters of penetration in the seabed, 60 or 70 meters of water, and then 150 meters of stick on top, it just becomes a really, really flexible stick, and there's a point where it becomes too flexible.
What's the diameter
Of the
poles?
of the poles, of the pile that goes into the seabed, it could be 10 meters, so pretty big. Yeah.
So can they use what's standard quakes?
Yes, very good question, because for New Zealand we'll have to look into that. Yeah, there's, I often get asked about tsunamis. Tsunamis are actually less of a problem than on land, because you probably know the tsunami wave becomes much higher as it approaches land. So at that kind of depth, the tsunami wave would just be a bit of a bump. But the earthquake, absolutely. More than the earthquake itself, the fact that it's such a long, slender structure is actually good from an earthquake perspective, because it flexes really, really slowly, whereas the earthquake shakes quite fast. So we say it's decoupled from the movements of the earthquake. Having said that, one of the issues is if the earthquake generates liquefaction in the ground and the foundations lose, strength. These turbines, we can at the maximum we can accept, I think it's 0.5 degrees out of verticality. So anything more than that will make the turbine not work anymore. So yeah, definitely earthquakes will be a big deal to be designed for. Yeah. This is what a monopile looks like. So the big steel cylinder that goes in the ground. Yeah, you see basically it's steel plates that get rolled in a machine like that. They get welded together, and then they get welded longitudinally, and they become just a big steel cylinder. So simple structure. It can weigh 2,000, 3,000 tons. So difficult to move around. Very difficult to move around. One of the questions that we get a lot, and I talked about it last year, is obviously you guys know everything about seabed mining and that kind of stuff, and one of the big issues is how it impacts the seabed, how much impact it has on the seabed. So, we want to sort of clarify what kind of impact this would have. So, yeah, we were talking about 10, 12 meter diameter steel cylinder. Yes, that has its own footprint around it. Normally there would be, we're saying roughly 40 meter diameter scour protection. So these are rocks that get placed to avoid basically the currents scouring away all the sand underneath the monopile. And then you have the cables connecting one turbine to the next. But this is sort of we try to do it to scale. The kind of impact on the seabed, I mean, where you have the monopile, obviously that's an impact, but the next turbine is 1.5, 2 kilometers away, and you only have the cable running in between. So largely, even though that area looks very wild because we need space in between the turbines, there's not a whole lot of activity happening on the seabed. Talking about the big vessels and the heavy components, one of the things we will need eventually is a port that can receive these components from overseas. Nothing like this can be built in New Zealand, not even in Australia. Probably Southeast Asia, maybe more probably from Europe. So yeah, you need ports that can accommodate these components. On the left there you have what is the largest offshore wind port in the world in Esbjerg in Denmark. We don't need anything like that. We're looking at, Port Taranaki has is in a good position from some perspectives. For example, it's quite a deep water port, and these vessels need at least 11, 12 meters draft to approach a port. Port Taranaki does have that. Having said that, there's not a lot of space on land to store any of these components. So that's one of the conversations we've been having with Port Taranaki for a while now on kind of type of upgrades that they would be required to do to host these components if this industry came to New Zealand. That is for the large components that when we build a wind farm, for the couple of years that it takes to actually construct it. then the wind farm would run for 30 years, and then at that point, the operations and maintenance, as in the not daily, but almost daily activity with a vessel like this, to go and maintain the turbines, that needs to happen from a port that is a lot closer to the wind farm. And so this one in green is the area of interest that I showed earlier, sort of between the 12 nautical miles and the 60-meter water depth. That Pattaya would be in a great position to, for example, have vessels like this going in and out, provided that we can get across the sandbar and all that kind of stuff. So Pattaya could be the place where the operations and maintenance harbor is located. Plenty more work that we need to do to figure out if this is actually feasible. But we did a technical study last year, and it showed that from a technical perspective, it's doable. There's at least roughly 2 meters.
Excuse me, what was involved in the technical study?
It was.
What did you study?
It was basically looking at what the river looks like in terms of if there's enough of I think it was a 2-meter deep channel that would allow something like this to go in and out.
What about the swell and things like that?
The waves?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the tricky bit, because getting out from the bar, obviously, that's where it gets tricky. And that determines how, let's say, available that port would be, as in how often in the year would vessels like this be able to go out to the turbines. That's the other thing that determines whether that
How
port is
often do those vehicles need to go to the turbines?
roughly every day or every 2 days. Yeah. It depends on how many turbines you have. There's some maintenance that needs to be done regularly, and other things it's more of a kind of emergency, go out when it's needed kind of thing. But yes,
So big is it? Oh, Shikama?
this is a 12 people crew transfer vessel, we're called. I'll check on the dimensions.
So is that the only type of vessel that you use to service the boats?
Kind of.
Turbines?
Kind of. This is specialized because it's not very clear here, but the boat, it looks like it crashed into the foundation. It didn't do that. So basically there's a ladder. You can't really see it. But the personnel, this pushes against this yellow thick boat landing, and the personnel would basically jump onto the ladder and then get up into the turbine. So you basically just need a vessel that has that kind of shape and I think dynamic characteristics that allow it to sit like that.
So how are they going to access the turbines when there's 3 or 4 metre split swells out there in a boat like that?
They could, if it's not too windy, helicopter in, which was the other. So that technical study that we did show that Pattaya only with something like this would be tricky because again, because of the wave conditions. So it would have to be complemented by also a helicopter on land, that sort of trait. In some cases, I mean, we were just on the threshold of making it work with crew transfer vessels and helicopters. So, that's the kind of stuff that, okay, we see that it is possible, it's not completely out of the question. For example, if the river had no 2-meter channel for most of the year, would require constant dredging, that would be the kind of stuff where we say, it seems really difficult to push Pattaya as having that opportunity. But we haven't seen that.
So if you can't use Pattaya, the project could still go ahead using New Plymouth as the service?
Using New Plymouth, yes, with a very different operations and maintenance strategy then. It's called, you don't use these anymore. You use a much larger vessel called the service operation vessel. It looks like a bit like the Inter-Island ferry kind of thing. And basically the idea is that every 2 weeks goes to New Plymouth, picks up crews, goes and lives at the offshore wind farm. And then the personnel go in and out with these from the larger vessel. Yeah, so it's a very different way of doing things. If Pattaya becomes impossible or anything on the south coast becomes impossible, that would be the other option.
How many people can you see a base like that in Pattaya employing?
Yep, I have some slides on that towards the end. Yeah, we're talking a bit about job opportunities. Cool. What are the phases of an offshore wind project? So these are really, really long. It takes a long time to set up something like this. And to be honest, these numbers I could add a couple of years to each of these. Very long feasibility and development phase at the beginning, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. That normally ends once we get an approval and license to actually proceed and build the thing. And I'll talk about how the ministry is looking at setting that up. A couple of years of construction, might be 3, depending on how accessible the area is. And then normally the wind farm like this would operate between 25 and 35 years, we normally say 30 as a sort of ballpark. At the end of that, like any power plant, you decide whether to repower it, as in, are the foundations still working okay? Can you put newer turbines? In 30 years, probably the technology would have evolved quite a bit. Can you put new turbines, or is the idea to just remove everything? And that's something that we have to cater for as well, so full decommissioning. Decommissioning is always a big topic. Up until a few years ago, most of the structure, because it's all steel, it's fully recyclable. Up until a few years ago, we had this sort of eyesore of the blades, which are made of carbon fiber, could not be recycled. That's not the case anymore. So in the last couple of years, the two main manufacturers of offshore wind turbines, Vestas and Siemens, both figured out a technology to actually melt the resin that holds the carbon fibers together, and that makes the blades also fully recyclable. So the whole turbine is now, I think, 99% recyclable or something like that. So I was mentioning feasibility and development stage. Sounds like a very exotic term. There's plenty that has to happen before a project like this can have the sort of evidence required to actually go ahead and build. This is part of that process, making sure that communities are understand the project and are happy with it. So at the moment we're in that phase sort of left of that bar. We're doing plenty of wind monitoring. As you can imagine, we're trying to figure out what the actual wind resource looks like. So we have a floating buoy out there in South Taranaki that is measuring wind speeds. I have a picture of that coming up. We're doing a lot of environmental work, what we can do at these early stages, which is mostly looking at all the information that has already been collected over the decades by, for example, the oil and gas people. We're doing a bit of our own small studies that I'll talk about as well. Looking a lot around jobs and what job opportunities could be coming, what training could look like. So we're doing all this work that kind of sets us up towards a feasibility permit. And I'll show what that means. But basically, at the moment there's no law in New Zealand that tells us that we can build offshore wind. We need to prove to government that the project we're proposing ticks a series of boxes. I'll show you what those are. Once we have a feasibility permit that tells us, yes, you can go out now and do your studies for feasibility, not you can go out and build, that comes way later. That's when we would start spending money on large-scale environmental surveys. And I said we're already doing some, but those ones, we're talking about tens of millions of dollars, because it's, both out there for 2 or 3 years, looking at marine mammals, planes in the air, looking at seabirds, so there's quite a lot going on. This means geophysical and geotechnical, so all the studies on the seabed to understand what we're installing the foundation in. Obviously, plenty of engineering design, understanding who will buy the electricity. So this is all the kind of evidence that we have to build to understand whether we want to, at the end, financial close or final investment decision. That's when the investors, NZ Super and CAP, decide whether they actually want to go ahead and build this thing.
Can I just ask, please,
Sure.
Are you the only company investigating offshore wind?
No, there's another, I'm gonna say 3 or 4. Yep.
So how many developments are there room for? Just the one or not?
Outside the 12 nautical miles, so outside that some are looking inside, we're looking at further out. I'm gonna say 2, space for 2 of these, not much more than that.
So what's the process for who gets to win?
That's the question. Yeah, that's the question that the ministry is working on, and that we developers need to understand as well. Basically, the rules of the game are being set right now, and we're looking at another 1.5 years before there is an application, before we can actually apply for a permit. And by then, we will need a little bit of reassurance on, do we understand that we looked at all the right things in order to win that permit, or is it going to be random draw?
Has anyone else been awarded permit yet? Or are
In New
you
Zealand,
all
no.
on the same timeline together?
Yeah. So the ministry are working on and this is MB, Ministry of Business, Innovation, Employment. They're working on the permitting regime as we speak.
So the other 3 or 4 potential participants, are they looking in the same areas what you want, or other areas?
No, that's pretty much the only area.
Oh, the only area.
Yeah, because of the water depths. So yeah, it's going to be interesting.
So,
So you see why a lot of our focus at the moment is literally trying to understand what is it that we need to do to prove that our project compared to our project would be the best one for the country.
So you're also competing with the sand mining.
Yes, in a very different way. Interestingly, seabed mining has more of a right to that area than offshore wind because there is legislation for seabed mining, right? There's legislation for mines to be opened in New Zealand, and they are applying under that, but there's no legislation for offshore wind. So we're trying to make the case that we think our projects, are useful, and someone has to decide that they are more useful than seabed mining.
So if
where we're at.
seabed mining wins
Yep.
and B's first,
Yep.
what happens to your project then?
We shut down this place, and
You're out.
when I find another job.
I asked a question quite a few months ago when you
Sure.
came and did some, how would I put it, sensitization
Mm-hmm.
discussions, and you came down to our beach, which is Oahui,
Yep.
as the warn, and said maybe the good lady might be here, and another bloke that came down.
Maybe it wasn't us.
I know, and it was to do with some.
Might have been
wind-
Park Wind, maybe?
Pardon?
Yeah. Anyway, might have been
Because I
another.
still got the paperwork from there when
Sure.
it came to talk to us about it. And the question I asked back then to those same people, and probably directly now to you, you good people, what the hell is wrong with the Cook Strait in Wellington? Consider it all up there, because that's the same wind that rips through there. So, or is that too visual for all those people that use most of the power anyway? So is that too visual?
It's too deep. Too deep and too, how do you say, blistering?
Oh, I didn't know about the Cook Strait.
That's made up word. Yeah, Cook Strait was one of the areas we looked at the very beginning. The other two areas are Waikato. Waikato has a bit of a strip of shallow enough water, not nearly as good winds as you guys have. Cook Strait has high winds, but they're very gusty, and the water is too deep. So that's the reason that I don't think any developer is looking at Cook Strait at the moment. It will require those floating offshore wind turbines. But and in terms of who uses most of the electricity, to be honest, it's Auckland. So it would be the best. Waikato is in the best position to actually serve.
That was one that I asked that during that time. The other one is where are you going to land the cables and where are they going to go?
Yep.
Because once you hit there, you're going to be hitting on resistance from my families and my people where it's going to land on
Yep.
land. But it looks like you're going to go around us anyway and come on to New Plymouth right around the long way.
No, so there is a 220 kV kilovolt line, the high power lines running sort of along the state highway, and that would be the obvious place to connect the cables that were landing from the wind farm. Where they will land exactly, we have no idea.
Right, so those were I wait in anticipation to have a look at.
Yeah,
When
yeah,
you're going
sure.
to be there.
Yeah, it takes a lot of time. There's like a lot of information that will go into that. First of all, what is the best route for the cables from the wind farm to land? Because there's plenty of reefs and things like that we have to kind of snake through. So there will be, let's say, a preferential corridor from here to land. There will be some, options like that, and then there will be some preferential corridors on land, which, for example, go through as few landowners as possible. Landowners that are okay with having pylons, all that kind of stuff. So that's all the information that would go into selecting a corridor.
Yeah, so
But
somewhere
again,
down the line it's going to come to a stoush anyway, that normally happens when we start stoushing the government on certain things
Yep.
versus what you want to bring in for the good of all
Mhm.
Aotearoa and New Zealand people and all whoever wants the power. So it becomes a bit of a dreadnought. This becomes, draconian along the line, because at the end of the day, there's people from over the wall, I'm not saying you, but your overseas lot,
Mhm.
coming and planting and doing what they need to do.
Mhm.
And it's not for really anything except, of course, it's all about money making, profit, whatever, and they need to utilise that, and on sale of the electricity, etc., you can go on and on and on. So
Yep.
it becomes tenfold.
Yeah,
So for us that are on the ground, that
Yep.
live here,
Yep.
in our environment, fish here, do all sorts of things there, we're very mindful of actually preserving and protecting what we've got. because it's not for me
Yep.
and everybody else coming.
Yep.
I look forward to see what they're going to see.
Yep.
That they already enjoy now.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Sure, that's all very well saying.
Well,
that,
that's
but
why
I
we're
haven't
here.
seen any sort of thing apart from what you've got over. I'm sorry, I'm still going. You showed us one part that was happening in Germany and all other
Yep.
places, off Denmark, out in the sea, and whatever. And I suppose that's all pretty well in there in those European countries,
Yep.
because they use a lot.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, we're only a small island down the bottom in the
Yep.
Pacific, and because we have some assets that suit the viability of them,
Mhm.
and you have to make a sale, I guess, for the power. Well, naturally you come here.
Yeah.
I might be fishing here, but
We are here. Yeah. We don't need to be here. We don't need to do these things so early on in the project, but we're still deciding to do it because we want to hear these. We want to have these conversations earlier on. We are trying to do something that does bring, does not just use the resources that you have, but does it in a way that you guys are actually benefiting as much as we can.
Yeah, well, I can imagine them creating quite a nice little kingfish grounds.
For example. Anyway, there's plenty of stuff that we need to look at.
Yeah.
Projects like this will not go ahead unless they are actually welcomed by communities. We know very well that by now. So again, we have years ahead to try and convince ourselves that it makes sense from a commercial perspective, but you guys that it makes sense for New Zealand as well. And you might have noticed a few weeks ago the energy crisis we were having with power prices through the roof. It's because we don't have enough. I'm not saying offshore wind. We don't have enough generation. We are talking of this as one of the possible solutions to that. It requires long-term view, which governments normally don't have, so we're kind of paddling against the stream there a little bit. We see it as an opportunity of something to look at. Have we decided to do it? Not at all.
So is there an electrical impact that's going to happen on the fish life under there? Because that's what upsets.
Fish life, yeah, as far as we know, there's no impacts from the electrical cables themselves. As far as I know, there's no sort of studies that show that there is an impact there, but it is a kind of study that if it's felt that we need to look at, we will be looking at. Again, this is the phase where we're designing what kind of studies we need to, what kind of things we need to look at. And we're trying to do it so that we don't go out, look at a bunch of things, come back to you guys, show you this is what we've done, and you tell us those are not the things that are important for us, right?
So on a short,
Yep.
the plants that you guys have overseas that have been operational for a number of years
Yep.
don't have major issues in that.
Major issues? No, I would say no.
Respect, you know.
Where they, it's an industry that is only 20 years old. There's still a lot that we learn from every new power plant. So
But you haven't noticed a loss of fishing ground, a loss of...
fishing normally is way improved by the structures. These, you can imagine, 2 days in, they're full of barnacles and everything.
Yeah.
3 days in, they're full of fish around. So, we're not talking too much about that. It's quite a new thing. We don't want to say that it's a solution to everything, but it's not all environmental detrimental impacts, right? And this effectively becomes, because bottom trawling cannot really happen in that area, it becomes a little bit of a marine reserve in some cases. So,
Excuse
yeah.
me, did you say there was 2 or 3 other companies are looking at the same sort of wind turbines?
Yeah.
How far are they? Have they started any consultation with anybody, or are you the first?
I think they're doing some consultation. I think we're the only ones who have opened that space and
Right.
I mean,
It's interesting that it's, to go eventually together. Obviously. Yeah.
each company will do it. Must say, we are working quite closely with the good ones of those few. There's a lot that we need to do together to kind of build the industry. There's a lot, we're trying to not fatigue people too much by going out and everybody talking about the same thing. So we try to coordinate a lot of efforts from that perspective. Then obviously, eventually 2 years from now, some will be getting a feasibility permit and some will not. That eventually will come to be something that we have to realize. Yes.
Have you had discussions with the government about your project helping with their Paris Agreement commitments to green energy? Did they talk about that with you?
The previous government was a little bit more interested in that side of things. We're saying since November last year we stopped using that side of things. with that, I actually had a slide that I took out of here because I realized yesterday I was practicing it, it was too confusing. But one of the questions that we investors keep asking ourselves is offshore wind needed in New Zealand? And if New Zealand decides to not care about climate targets, then no, then we don't need this kind of generation at this scale. But that means that in 10 years' time, we're paying billions of dollars in fines for not having upheld our climate targets. So, you know, the current government is focusing very much on, fair enough, there's a lot of short-term stuff that needs to be fixed. So they're focusing on that. We're hoping that in the next couple of years, they come back to realize that, you know, we can't just walk away from those climate targets. Yeah.
And they're aware of the big fines, so, yeah?
You would hope so. Yeah.
Let's hope
There's
so.
a Minister for Climate Change. Yeah, he's hearing it a lot.
So what's the argument for building offshore wind?
Yeah.
And presumably, I mean, you've already given us some details about the capacity and the megawatt hours you might be able to generate.
Yep.
But why is this a better option than 50% of the population putting solar panels on their roofs?
Yep. We're not saying it's better, we're saying it will need to be a little bit of everything together. We call it a portfolio of renewable generation types. So you can have a lot of people putting solar panels on their roofs. At night, you will still need some other form of generation from somewhere. There will be batteries. Sorry?
Unless you've got battery backup.
Sure. You can have batteries. You can have, again, it will have to be a mix of things. And solar panels on roofs would not allow you to run Fonterra's boilers drying power. So, you know, again, it's a mix of things. In a way, we are competing with things like onshore wind. There's a lot of onshore wind farms that can be built that will be cheaper to build than this thing. But we did quite a significant piece of study earlier this year where the amount of onshore wind turbines and solar farms that would be required for what we think will be the demand in 10 years' time is we don't think New Zealanders will want that many on land. And, you know, traditionally, that's why we've seen offshore wind start in Europe, because there wasn't any land people didn't want as much larger generation on land anymore. So this was a sort of obvious alternative. But, you know, we did that study that shows us if this is the demand for electricity in 10 years, then we need offshore wind. So, for example, one thing that we will be doing in the coming years is tracking how the demand is growing. Again, our investors want to know, are we proposing a product that nobody needs in this country? Because, you know, we want to pull the plug before we spend too much money on that. Makes sense.
Have you been used on the fast track?
Yeah, so back in February we got contacted by the minister asking us if we wanted to be on the fast track list, and us and all the other offshore wind developers said that no. So offshore wind is not on the fast track. We advocated for not to be. Again, we've been doing things like this for 1.5 years now because we believe it's the right thing to do, reaching out to communities and hearing what the concerns are so we can set up the industry properly. Fast track just seemed like a social license killer with the whole idea of, you know, basically allowing for as little consultation as possible. So it was just not what we were looking for. So yeah, offshore wind is excluded from fast track legislation because of that. Just quickly, this is, well, I'll go as quick as I can. I was talking about the ministry, MB doing work on setting up a permitting regime. Yeah, it might be difficult to read all this stuff. You don't need to read all of this, it's all on the MB website. But just to say, this permitting regime that they're working on, it's basically a new act of parliament that will hopefully be introduced to parliament later this year, hopefully voted into full effect sort of mid of next year. And that will be what sets the rules of the game for offshore wind. And what it will do especially is set up these two permits, feasibility permit and commercial permit. So hopefully by the end of next year there will be an application process in place for us to apply for a feasibility permit. If we win a feasibility permit in 2026, what that allows us is we have then 7 years to use it or lose it. They would check that we're actually doing stuff with it. In those 7 years, we will have the exclusive right to investigate that area of seabed to look at whether we want to build an offshore wind farm. We're still not allowed to build it. We're allowed to go out, do all our studies, and at the end of that, know that if we do decide to go ahead, then we are the only ones who have the right. That's a pretty important step. for investors when, I was talking about the tens of millions of dollars that are required to do all those studies. Obviously, you want to know that you're spending all that money, knowing that then you have that the resource is kind of yours to use. That's as simple as it is. So it will be a comparative assessment. So the ministry will be receiving several applications, and they'll have to figure out some way of deciding that one is better than the other. And that's the bit where we're still a bit unclear. And I think they're unclear as well. Having said that, it's being done in every other country. In Australia, this process was launched last year and a half ago. We won 2 licenses out of that. So it's just a matter of putting in a lot of hours that Jesse and I and Tiga and the others in the team will have to putting together a 20,000 page document that convinces the government that our project is better for the country than others.
So we have a New Zealand superannuation organisation interested in any of the other potential applicants, or is it only with you guys?
Only with us.
Only with us.
Unless they are secretly planning something behind
Yeah.
worth saying they picked us because we're the ones who have built the most offshore wind farms that have just sneaking that in. Yes.
So all going well,
Yes.
when would you expect to see them up and running if you took every yes box the whole way through?
2032, we could have turbines installed, delivering what we call first power, so the first connection to land, and 2034 could be the full wind farm in place. That is if absolutely goes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Everything goes, I'm not so late.
So the seabed mining is on fast track.
It is.
So if they award
we-
that, you're out of here, is that right?
First of all, we don't quite know if it's been included in the list yet of projects that will be considered. Probably yes. Hopefully no, but probably yes. Hope there's no seabed mining aficionados in here. But if they get that passed, they still have to obtain the consent. I mean, it's still a process they have to go through to obtain the consent. If they did get the consent, then that's when we would start panicking mildly. Yes. So there's still a bit of time.
So with permitting, obviously, you're looking at greater than 12 nautical miles, is that right? So what's the difference in permitting outside of that EEZ versus inside?
Yeah, good question. The permitting regime they're setting up kind of covers the whole area. It's the consenting that is different. So permitting means bunch of boxes that we need to tick to convince government, show that there will be regional development opportunities out of this, that we will be doing it in a way that we can guarantee that can be decommissioned. So all of that stuff, all of the environmental aspects that we have to tick sit under the box of consenting. And at the moment, if we were to apply right now, we would have 2 different consenting regimes, one outside 12 nautical miles under the EEZ Act. So that would be a regime where we apply to the EPA, Environmental Protection Authority, but then our cables obviously would be running to shore through the RMA, and then we would have to apply to Taranaki Regional Council. So one of the things we're discussing with MB is, in a few years' time, we would like to not have to apply for 2 consents saying exactly the same thing to 2 different agencies. So we're hoping that in the coming years we manage to shape together with them a one-stop shop is the name, where there is one agency that is sort of responsible to assess our entire consenting. Those are the kind of things that we're trying to flesh out with the ministry as we speak, because at the moment they're up in the air, and you can see how much uncertainty it leaves us in, because we don't know what we have to go and look at to prove our point, basically. That feasibility permit, again, would allow us 7 years of time where we do all our studies. It doesn't mean that we need to use the whole 7 years. Maybe 4 years in, we've done all the studies, you guys are happy that the project should go ahead and all that, and then we apply for a commercial permit. That lasts for 40 years. Yeah, 40 years. And that's basically the right to actually go out and build the thing. This is kind of the map that the ministry is setting up for us. You can see decommissioning has its own spot, as in there's quite a bit of work that we would have to do to prove that at the end of the life we're not just going to just walk away and New Zealand has decommissioned like what happened recently. Big part of that is how we build up a bit of financial security around that. So the idea is for the 30 years of operation of the wind farm, we would be sort of putting money aside to make sure that at the end, even if we're not around, that there is the money to actually decommission the project. That's standard in Europe at the moment, and so that's one of the things that we sort of imported straight away. I won't talk too much more about this because everyone will fall asleep, but if you have questions, go ahead. Yeah, a bit of the activities that we've been doing in the last year. I was talking about our floating glider that we launched from Port Taranaki June last year. The idea was to do a 1-year campaign. So you can see, pretty chunky piece of equipment. The important part of that is sitting up there behind the solar panel. There's this cube that looks like a washing machine. And all it does is a laser. Well, all it does, it's amazing. It's a laser that looks up all the way 300 meters above sea level and then measures wind speeds at every 10-meter height. So at the end we get I think it's a 5-second or 10-second recording time. And so at the end we get a perfect profile of what the wind looks like. So basically this allows us to say, if we did have an offshore wind farm in place for that year, this is how much it would have generated. A couple of videos it runs. Not very eventful, but that's a video of the glider being towed out of Port Taranaki in a beautiful day. Oops. Well, you can imagine it floating around because of a more interesting video. Another activity that we did just a couple of weeks ago, that's very, very fresh, and we have Alison here who was on the boat and can talk about the magic. The seasickness. So one of the things that we hear a lot is not much is known in environmental terms about South Taranaki Bight. Despite all the sort of oil and gas that has gone on, there hasn't been a lot of proper scientific studies, especially in terms of marine mammals and understanding how marine mammals use this area, whales, dolphins, and so on. And so roughly a year and a half ago, we had an environmental technical working group that kind of highlighted the problem. And we decided to run this is a very small scale for what we will need to do, but it's a pilot study where we placed 3 underwater microphones in these areas that you see here. And they will sit on the seabed for a year and basically listen and figure out how many whale songs they pick up. And that will give us a bit of a map after a year of how marine mammals use that area. Again, this is very high level. If we were doing the full study, after a permit was awarded, there would probably be many more microphones. But we thought it was worth, starting to gather some data. On the left there is a map of the scientists who designed the study for us, and it kind of shows those are the radiuses of call of various marine mammal species: blue whales, southern right whales, and pygmy blue whales. And basically that means, placing the 3 microphones in those places would allow us to get a good coverage of those species across the area. This is what they actually look like. It's a big tripod. What was it? Half a ton to the weight?
Yeah,
like that?
no, they were about a ton.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have sort of canisters that I'm assuming are for the data and the batteries, and you see each of them has 4 microphones, and yeah, magically it gets dropped off the side of the boat, and mysteriously it lands upright on the seabed, they tell me. And then it sits there for a year and records things. Actually, it sits there for 6 months until Alison and the crew will go out and with an acoustic signal release a buoy from in there that will pop out all the way up where the boat is, and they'll be able to pull up the whole device, change the batteries, and put it back in. It's pretty cool. That's me. And I have the video of it actually being launched on a beautiful wavy day. So yeah, real stuff. And I think they did check that they landed upright.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, they pinned them up so they landed and they were wings the right way up. We were very happy as well.
Perfect. So yeah, in 6 months and then a year, we will have a record of how the species are using that area. Again, this is just an initial thing. It doesn't substitute for anything that we will have to do eventually, but we thought it was worth starting to collect some data. On the environmental, another couple of pieces of work we've been doing for the last year is a bit more sort of office-based, but we set up two experts group, one on seabirds and one on marine mammals. And again, here the idea is to get the sort of few real experts in these fields in a room to kind of have a bit of a brainstorm around, how would offshore wind impact marine mammals and seabirds. So again, we can start early on thinking about what kind of studies we need to look at. For example, the seabird one, that's quite a numerical study. And that is in charge of that as well. They're looking to set up effectively a risk assessment, so score each of the seabird species in New Zealand, score them based on how likely are they to be impacted by offshore wind. And then we will have a list of instead of the 82 species, 185 species, we will hopefully have a bit of a shorter list of the ones that we really need to focus on because they are more at risk of being impacted by offshore wind. Jobs and training, and this will be sort of the wrap up. This again is picking up a little bit from what we did last year. There will be a specific session on jobs and training in 2 months' time, I think, but thought I'd reiterate a little bit what we said last year. We did a year-long study looking at what kind of jobs an offshore wind farm of this size would bring in the country. This is a breakdown, years after the project starts. You have obviously a little bit of work in the planning phase, a lot of work in the manufacturing phase to actually build the components. That, let's be clear, will likely not be in New Zealand. Installation and connection, there's quite a few hours of work there. That could be partly in New Zealand, depending on how good a job we do at preparing people here for these jobs. The important bit, even though it's low on the chart, this yellow one, is the jobs that come with operations and maintenance, because those might be fewer jobs, but those run for the whole 30 years of the project's life. And those are good high quality jobs. They can be really localized, as in we saw the example of Pattaya. They could be people actually from Pattaya that go out and do that study. And then a few jobs at decommissioning. So this is, again, the spotlight on this operations and maintenance phase for a 1,000 megawatt offshore wind farm, which is what we're looking at. Tier 1, those are the people who are directly employed in going out and servicing the turbines. We were estimating around 70 jobs. Tier 2, those are the indirect jobs, so maybe people who transport components and things like that, 45 to 70. And then we look at induced jobs, so basically all the jobs that pop up because you have all these other people, right? So hairdressers and Foursquare owners, things like that. So yeah, we're looking at, let's say, 150, something like that, jobs, just direct and indirect, and then, yes, another 40 to 90 on top for induced. Worth saying, we didn't just take numbers from the rest of the world and scaled them to Taranaki. We did quite a lot of work of reaching out to companies in the Taranaki area, understanding what skills are available, what skills are transferable. So we went quite detailed. So we're quite happy with those numbers there. Obviously, what then happens will depend on how much more work we do between now and then to again prepare people for the opportunity. We published this offshore wind jobs guide, of which I think we have some over there. So basically this was built on the good work that our colleagues did over in Australia for Star of the South, our project there, which was basically looking at all these jobs types. They're nicely set out in a matrix that shows you in which phase of the development or construction or operations and maintenance each job when it's needed, and then what kind of qualification you would need. Is it sort of marine qualification, tertiary, on the job training, things like that. Here are some examples of the types of jobs, and you will find this in the jobs guide. Contract and commercial manager, so this would be someone who works both in all the phases, development, construction, operation. They will probably need a tertiary education to a degree of some kind. There could be mechanical hydraulics technician, trade qualification as a mechanical fitter, or the master of the crew transfer vessel would be more during the operations, and it would be more skipper, coastal, offshore qualification. So we're trying to do a bit of this mapping to understand what would be required when. Importantly, this is a slide from last year because we were saying the next steps, so next year, this year, we will focus on training, and that's exactly what we're doing now. So we've done that first sort of snapshot of what kind of jobs could come, what job opportunities are out there. One thing that we realized is that there is really good training for some of those positions already in the country, but there's a lot of training that is lacking. And so we're asking the question, what can we do from that perspective? Can we help set up training programs? Can we help set up, well, thinking about what training should look like in order to maximize how many people actually get these jobs when they come? So we're doing our industry capability mapping phase 2, which is again focused on training. We're trying to get together the likes of, Ministry of Education, WIT, Ministry of Social Development, a lot of independent training providers. We're trying to get everybody in a room to do a bit of brainstorming around what should we be doing, mindful that we are years away from an industry that might not happen, and so we can't set up any, a degree in offshore wind tomorrow. Obviously, there is some planning required to make sure that we're setting up the right things at the right time. So it's not an easy piece of work, but we're trying to do as much as we can to think about it. And obviously there will be different pathways to training going ahead. So people who are now in primary school who might want to end up working in offshore wind, the pathway will probably be obtain a secondary qualification, maybe tertiary or trade, and then get a job. But then there's another pathway, which is people that are already working in some industry that has transferable skills, like oil and gas, for example, and want to do on-the-job training to get these additional skills. So all of these pathways have a different, structure that we would need to build behind it. What the answer is, I don't quite know. We just started the work, but hopefully in 2 months' time, when we have the jobs and training session, we'll be able to elaborate a bit on that. I think that's it in terms of what I had planned for the night. Shall we open it up for questions? I'm sure.
I've got a query for you.
Sure.
With the government we have in power at the moment seem to have a greater priority on prospecting for oil and gas. Some of that capital is covered from where you're planning the wind farm. Can that be incorporated together, or your comments, please?
Yeah, we have fewer issues with oil and gas than seabed mining, to be honest. Oil and gas tends to be a quite localized use of an area. And to be honest, for example, in the North Sea in Europe, there's quite a few examples of offshore wind farms sitting nearby offshore oil and gas fields. Seabed mining, the issue there is just the scouring of the vast area of seabed that you can imagine doesn't go really well with the cables.
The most is under, apart from where the rig is in the pipeline to the shore.
Yep.
That would be the only issue really for you guys at all, wouldn't it?
Yeah, we have quite a good relationship with Beach Energy, who own the Cooper platform, which is right in the middle there. There's a lot of talk about, for example, they do a lot of marine studies, like environmental studies similar to what we do. So we're constantly trying to, for example, optimize if someone is going out with a vessel, can the other company tag along? So we are trying New Zealand is an environment of small resources. There's not a lot of vessels around. So we're trying to make the most of, being efficient and having communication channels open. And with oil and gas, it's been quite good communication. Worth saying, yes, the new government is aiming a lot at oil and gas coming back offshore.
I'm not saying they're right, but I mean that's just the way we are.
Yeah. We're pretty difficult to see that actually happen. These are huge investments to go offshore, and again, I think the signal has already been given that New Zealand eventually will probably not want offshore oil and gas again, and so will then investors decide to actually go drilling the wells. But having said that,
today, the full steam ahead plans are to find some more gas somewhere.
Yeah. Now they're talking about importing LNG from other countries.
Exactly. Which then is going to be potentially likely based in Taranaki as well, isn't it?
Yeah, potentially. Worth saying, all of these discussions are being had because New Zealand in the last 20 or 30 years hasn't really thought much about energy. We've been kind of everything was left purely to the market, which meant Gen Taylors went out and built a little bit of generation when needed. So that worked okay because we have lights where our industries are running, but now we're seeing every night every time there's a year where the water is scarce and things like that, we see what the impact is. And so offshore wind lives in a future when New Zealand is a little bit more strategic around providing a lot of renewable electricity. It's not always an easy sell with politicians, but maybe they're getting more.
To what extent are the 4 companies working together in these initial feasibility studies? Because you seem to work together in terms of your stance on the fast track and the likes. So in terms of these initial studies of the microphones and likes, are you working together on
microphones? Whoops.
I killed it.
Microphones was just us. But the other studies, for example, the seabird, I'll never find it again. The seabird and marine mammal expert groups, all that kind of stuff, where we organize them all together. So it's the 4 developers all have access to the same kind of information. Yes, so we're trying to do a lot of studies together. At the same time, we have to be mindful around a few years' time. You can imagine if we're all working on the same stuff, and in a year and a half time we show up to apply for a permit and everybody has the same information, it's kind of tricky for me to go to my investors now and say, keep giving us money to do this thing where in a year and a half time we have exactly all the same information as everybody else. It's a fine line on where do we achieve a little bit more merit and so on. Yes.
Well, to get to FID, what's your spend approximately, or what would
We're
it
looking at
forecast them?
potentially 300 million.
Yeah.
That's ballpark.
Well,
It could be. The construction phase will be 5 billion, so it's still, in the grand scheme of things, 300 million is.
And your best case scenario was destruction starting in, just say 2032.
13 roughly, yes.
So, what, FID in
2030. Yeah, that's, again, if everything goes really, really well.
potentially you're spending 300 million in the next 5 years.
A lot of it is environmental studies and the soil studies, especially the geotechnical studies. That can be $80 million. Yes. So obviously, the idea is we certainly New Zealand Super Fund is taxpayers' money. It's my money as well. And so one thing that we don't want to do is spend $300 million and then go, okay, we're not doing this. So certainly we're working with plenty of milestones and sort of gateways along the years where if at some point it's clear that this is not the right thing, we stop spending.
Yeah.
Do you need off-take agreements with big NG users before FID, or do you believe there's enough capacity in the market that it'll get soaked up anyway?
No, we absolutely need contracts. Offshore wind, so I'm talking about NZ Super and CAB paying for this. The reality is in projects like this, equity participation by groups like them would be roughly 30%, so say 2 billion of the 5 billion. The rest is normally lent by banks, by a consortium of banks that comes together. It's called project finance. Banks want to be very clear around what kind of cash flow you're going to have, how much money you're going to make out of this venture. And so it wouldn't really be possible to get it through just selling on the wholesale electricity market. So normally these projects require long-term contracts for electricity.
So you look for like Methanex or someone like that to say, look, we can produce as much power, can you buy it?
Correct.
Or whatever.
Yeah, we're looking at the obvious ones. Methanex being one, although Methanex need more green hydrogen than electricity. Fonterra is a big one, once they decide to switch to boilers. Yeah, New Zealand Steel, if they convert more of their processes to electric arc furnaces. So that's all the kind of stuff that we do need to think a lot about. And to be completely honest, it's probably going to be the final thing that, unless it's solved, project like this doesn't really go ahead. Again, because we wouldn't be able to access the funding from banks.
What's your sort of base price per megawatt, or is that commercially sensitive?
Aside from commercially sensitive, at the moment I could give you a number, but in 5 years' time it would be
2 or 3 years ago it was what, 100. First 6 months it's been around 300.
It's less than that.
So somewhere
it's in between those two numbers. A lot closer to the 100 than the 300. No, based on like the power prices that we were having in the last month, we would have run the wind farm without any contract needed. But obviously we all agree that's not what New Zealand needs. That was just I'll say the word extortionate, but so no, it requires a lot less. Is it more expensive than onshore wind? Yes, but again, we're talking about a technology that is fitting in a system where we realize that unless we have this large-scale generation, we're short of electricity every other year. And so, there is a social sort of benefit in having extra generation out there.
Well, it's been a difficult year this year could have been an unusually cold winter plus sort of very low rainfall, cold and dry.
Yeah.
And then of course that's the base, and then the shortage of gas as well.
Sure.
Because there's been no development for years.
Yes.
So it's been a one-off type year really, hasn't it?
Yeah, but I think it happens every 5 years.
Yeah,
It's a one-off.
I mean, I'm not saying it won't happen again next year.
No, sure.
Yeah, because it will happen again.
Yeah. That's one of the things that we talk a lot about is the term resilience. So again, the New Zealand electricity system works well, but it's not very resilient. It works well until it doesn't, all of a sudden. And there hasn't been a lot of concerted efforts in making it so that when stuff hits the fan, then we still have abundant energy available, and the prices don't go crazy, and there's no companies that need to shut down because their processes are too expensive. So those are the signs of an energy system that sure works well every now and then, but I think we probably want something a bit more, a bit more resilient. The terms resilience, again, in the scheme of why do we need offshore wind, we use it a lot also when we talk about our offshore wind farm will be connected to the North Island. You might know that a lot of, if not most of the generation in New Zealand comes from the bottom of the South Island, where the hydro lakes are. So we're always relying on those underwater cables between the two islands working perfectly and connecting the two markets flawlessly and all the time. We know very well that's not the case, especially with cables that run along the Alpine Fault that we know will be triggered eventually. So, we're seeing the value in large-scale generation. This wind farm at maximum power would be more than the largest dam in the South Island. Connected to the North Island would help make the North Island a lot more resilient, if that makes sense. Very good questions. Yes?
What's been the biggest pushback to date?
Seabed mining, probably one. As in, pushback, it's one of those things that, everybody's scratching their head. Politicians don't necessarily seem to want to get in the merits of that discussion. They realize that someone has to make the decision on how that area gets used. And New Zealand doesn't really have marine spatial planning, so there's no one in charge of deciding, yes, this area can only be used for one thing or the other. And so we're a bit in limbo there from a legal point of view. But pushbacks, I would say there's a lot of information out there that we still need to provide. A lot of people don't know what it is that we're talking about. That's what we're trying to sort out with gatherings like these, where at least we have the right information out there. And in a few years' time, we don't expect everyone to be 100% on board with a big project like this. I don't think it would be human nature. But at least if we can have proper discussions on what the merits are and how we can do it better and all that. So I wouldn't say there's been any real pushback, but just at least making sure that everybody knows what the information is. Yes.
How would you measure, what words would you use to measure the progress that's been made from the very first wind farms on the planet to now? What have they learned?
Offshore wind farms or wind farms in general? A lot about decommissioning, a lot about removing them at the end in a sustainable way, not burying blades in the desert. That's for sure something that, another big innovations. Building bigger means that more powerful turbines means that we need fewer of them to make the same amount of electricity, which means less impact on the seabed, things like that. That's why we're always aiming to have as large machines as possible, because if we had a 30 megawatt turbine, we would only need 35 instead of 70. So probably it's been that, so scale. Glad to say it's an industry that has always been very careful with health and safety and things like that. So it's, I think, one of the industries with the best record in terms of despite the marine environment being incredibly dangerous. Very, very few incidents, and it's something that I think still probably inherited from oil and gas, which has always been very careful with that. There was a lot of learning from oil and gas that we took on board.
Is there a history of ongoing environmental monitoring around the existing sites?
Yes.
In the Northern Hemisphere?
I think most, certainly, of the offshore wind farms built in the last 10 or 15 years, they all have think, lifelong environmental monitoring. In some cases, there's one big thing is the risk of collisions with seabirds, and so there's radars installed on the individual turbines to basically monitor the arrival of a flock of birds and potentially slowing down the rotor until the birds come past. So there's a lot of that stuff going on. A lot of fishing, so marine life monitoring to see if the wind farm is attracting fish life, things like that. So yeah, it's quite a bit. Again, what we will need to do is one of the things that we need to discuss in the coming years. If there's a desire to have a specific type of study that goes on for the entire life of the project. Yes.
On the score, you need battery technology as well?
Not at the moment, but I think I should, because every other person asked me about the same thing. So maybe we should be looking at batteries. Batteries are interesting. They're normally mostly to do with solar energy than wind, and I think, I'm not a battery expert, but I suspect it's because just we generate so much electricity that a battery would fill up, unless you have 3 hectares of batteries, it would fill up straight away. And
when the wind stops flowing,
yeah,
to do something, so
sure,
not particularly just dairy batteries, but even generating electricity now.
Yeah, that could be a thing. Yeah, green hydrogen would be.
You can do that offshore too.
Yeah.
Put around, so you also have the CV mining it.
Yeah. Interestingly, what I would say is, in a way, we are considering a battery, because if we were pumping a gigawatt from this into the system, the lakes in the South Island would not need to be used. So those would stay up, and there you have your battery. You're conserving energy to use sometime else. So in a way, you can see it like that, which is very much not the way that, for example, Meridian wants to think about. But we'll leave it at that. No, look, the electricity system, and by the way, I should plug, in a month's time we'll be doing another session where I will try to demystify exactly that, the electricity market, how it works, and I'll try, because I'm not an expert, but I think it's fascinating, and I often get asked the question, will this make the electricity cheaper? The short answer is yes. There's a lot behind that yes, though, and so I would like to try and explore it with you and see if we can all understand it together. The other 2 sessions we're saying, so that one is early October, maybe just as the date, January. Early October we're talking about that. Early November we're talking about the training and jobs in a bit more detail. And early December we're talking about environmental stuff, with probably Alison talking instead of me. It's really well.
What is your LiDAR showing in terms of wind speed versus assumptions or previous data?
It's windier than we thought it was.
So it's better than what you thought?
At least up to March, I think we were getting an average of 11 meters per second monthly wind speed, and we were banking on 10.5. So even stronger than that. Yeah.
Have you reckoned that you're in the middle of the interest area?
Roughly, slightly south, because there's actually another LiDAR on the Coupe platform that we installed. Again, that's a good point. Another thing that we did with the other developers, there's I think 4 of us that came together to install a fixed LiDAR on the Coupe platform. Yeah. But we're the only ones who have a floating one as well. And we put that roughly 10 kilometers south, because we wanted to get that, once we have the 2 data sets, we'll be able to see what the change in wind is coming from the coast or going towards the coast. So just sort of a little bit more of a profile of how the wind moves around.
Do you envisage your winds due to climate change or similar pattern? Or?
Yes, actually yes. I was at a conference a few months ago where a climate change scientist was talking about forecasts of how things will change, and if I remember correctly, South Island hydro will be even worse. There will be less water less rainfall in the South Island and more windiness in the North Island, which I was like, whoa, we need to hire
So you will be building according to what it may be in 10 to 15, 20 years time rather than today data.
We're starting now to put those climate change forecasts. We probably should have done it a while ago, but it's still, in some cases it's difficult to, I guess, ensure is that the right science, but as it's becoming more and more clear that it is the right science, then we're trying to build it into our assumptions. Okay. It would be silly not to do it, because the world will be very different in 10, 15 years time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So is your one identity over in as well as the blue float one? You do to those ones?
Blue float are one of the other
identities, such as yourselves, that are looking at.
One of the other entities, yes. Yeah.
I'm not quite sure how many there are, but that was one of them.
Yes.
When I had to listen to.
Yeah. Correct.
And there's another one called the Elementary Elements.
Elemental are together with Bluefloat. They're
Yeah.
a joint venture. And another one would be Park Wind. There's another one.
Okay.
And there's another one that we'll leave unnamed that is looking at a wind farm inside the 12 nautical miles, not outside, but it probably does what they want. I mean, it's up to them to come and talk to you guys and convince you that it's a good idea.
Should be interesting. Thank you for that.
Okay, thanks all for coming. It's really important that we have these moments for discussion, because it's important for us to hear what's important to talk about. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.